So moving along, Áine, last but not least, we have Áine Ní Chualáin. She's a Senior Director, Research and Development Council with Alcarms. It's a global pharmaceutical manufacturing and biopharmaceutical company. So you're very strong on innovation and on the legal side and all the documentations that we need to be very good on. So I suppose with Brexit and all the talk of finding new markets, it will be invaluable to get some of your ideas and insights into what we should be aware of and what we should look out for. So Áine, thank you.
In my role in Alchemy's, I work on research and development projects, and that involves working across, at the moment, up to 50 countries. And so based on some of the experiences of COVID and seeing some of that international experience play out, I just wanted to share some practical tips with you this morning. It's not legal advice, so I won't hopefully turn anybody away from the screen, but it may be helpful in thinking about how to prepare for Brexit. So the first thing that I wanted to highlight was that no two crises are the same. So we've been through a fairly unprecedented time in business with COVID-19. And I think in some ways that may have distracted some of us, at least in Ireland, from preparing for Brexit. And albeit that both scenarios have been really disruptive, there are some key differences that I think that companies need to bear in mind as you're preparing for Brexit. COVID-19 was unprecedented, a global pandemic that impacted all of us, all areas of life and commerce. And the initial response globally was very creative, flexible, and was focused on short-term actions. There was a real sense of we're all in this together and we're all going to try and figure it out and get through it until the vaccine is introduced. And there were some instances of temporary relaxation of laws and regulations to help us get through it. With Brexit, the situation is going to be entirely different, albeit that it's still fairly unknown, as Michael has referred to. It has been expected since June 2016. And our options are hopefully that a trade deal will be negotiated or there will be WTO tariffs. There's no grey areas. It's not the same scenarios we faced with COVID where we just didn't know what was going to be facing us, tomorrow or next week. Given the nature of the crisis and then, the realities of EU law and the WTO rules, there is no scope for flexibility. It's not a temporary crisis. This is a new permanent international legal order. So while both crises are very significant and they both impacted all of the organisations, I'm assuming, dialing into this call today in many ways, you need to look at them differently and don't assume that what worked for COVID will work for Brexit. So in terms of how to think about Brexit, I thought one of the points that Ben made about market research and all of the toolkits that are out there, but needing to look at your own business with your own intimate knowledge of it is really important. And I agree with it in terms of how to think about your risk assessment for Brexit. And so here I've just identified the 5 areas that I think businesses need to look at. So 4 of them are the free movements. So capital, people, goods and services. And I've also added data because I know I will probably depress anybody who hasn't already been concerned by some of the things that they've heard when I mentioned GDPR. Data and free movement of data is something that we need to think about as well. So what might that mean for your business? So in terms of capital, I think when you're looking at Brexit, think about the realities of where you're trading. So if you already have relationships in the UK, if you're selling into the UK or you're buying goods or services from the UK, think about your exchange rates. The outlook for the financial health of the UK after Brexit is not very positive. So may that impact interest rates or even the pound. So just think about that. UK-based financial services entities, which had a legal right to offer services into Ireland in the past and into other European member states, will no longer have that passporting right from the start of next year. So many people may already have received letters from their insurance companies letting them know that their business is being moved from one company to another. Previously, we didn't need to be concerned about that because all of the companies were within the, all of these companies were operating under a passport in the EU, and it didn't really matter to us where they were based, but going forward it will be. So then also think about any investments, pensions that you may have in the UK, and then bank transfers. Simple things like paying your vendors or being paid may be more complicated, even if it's just in the initial days or weeks of 2021, but prepare for that. In terms of people, Michael mentioned this, but visas, immigration, they're going to obviously be things to consider, but also travel delays. I'm sure we're all very familiar with hopping on an early flight from Shannon or Dublin to go over to London for a day's business. Hopefully under the common travel arrangements, that will still be a very easy, streamlined process for anybody who holds an Irish passport, but it may be different if you people in your organizations who don't have Irish passports. And so that may have implications. Regarding goods, Michael has already spoken about customs delays, the supply chain impacts. And so what I think is really important for businesses to check for yourselves is, what do you procure which or what do you provide that goes in whole or in part through the UK. And many people are unaware of the component parts of their supply chain or even their services which come to the UK. And if you don't know that, you can't prepare for it. So now is the time just to do a sanity check and see if any parts of your business are reliant on providers who are based in the UK. And then you can prepare for potential delays and or alternative suppliers. In terms of services, if you procure or provide services which are performed in the UK, that may have an impact as well. Will there be any business interruption, or will there be a regulatory impact? So will the law change? In my own industry, and I focus on clinical research, the European Medicines Agency had to relocate from the UK to a European country because of Brexit. And as a result, that delayed everything in terms of new laws, new European laws for clinical research for the last few years. However, now that move has happened, it's all systems go again with European regulation and oversight for clinical research. So the attention has already moved from Brexit to the new areas. So in your own industries, think about what might happen or where the focus may be when Brexit is done. And then in terms of data, all of the above potentially include flows of personal data through the UK. And after the 1st of January, the UK is going to be considered a third country. It's going to mean a cross-border transfer. So you will need to have a legitimate basis and an appropriate mechanism to transfer personal data of EU citizens to the UK. Now that may mean servers being hosted in the UK. It may be something that you don't even realise is happening at the moment because of how streamlined and integrated data flows are at the moment. So if you had a GDPR file back in 2016 where you mapped your processing activities, I would suggest just dusting that down again and having a look at it to check if any updates or new mechanisms are required. But keep it simple. So when you're thinking about this, don't get overwhelmed by any of this. I mean, everybody is dealing with it, but you know your business best. So take some time to look at your business and think about what your interactions with the UK is, what are your dependencies, and then write it all down and look at it regularly to see if it's still accurate or if you've made any tweaks, and have other people in your organization look at it as well, because they may be aware of aspects to your business that you're not as familiar with. And the more eyes on this, the more relevant it's going to be. And then focus on the biggest risks for your business or your sector. As Ben alluded to, there's opportunities in this for everybody. So what are your opportunities? Do you have any competitive advantages? Do you have any negotiation leverage with your vendors or your clients? In terms of challenges, think about what could go wrong. If you get that dreaded phone call that your goods are going to be landlocked in the UK and that you're going to be suffering customs delays, how are you going to handle that? Do you know if that phone call comes in, who's going to receive the phone call, and will they know what to do with it? Because bad enough being delayed, worse if that message has been left at the reception desk and nobody knows about it, for hours or days. And then think about the positive and negative impact on your suppliers and your vendors. This isn't just going to affect each business in isolation, but this is going to have impacts across the board. And you need to think about how that may impact you. If you're dependent on somebody else to deliver something to you and they aren't prepared for Brexit, then you have a weakness. And then also think about potential cash flow challenges for clients. Will you get paid? Do you need to think about those issues? Supply chain is a huge concern. And as I mentioned, think about all of the stakeholders in your value chain and what their challenges and opportunities are. Some key lessons from the COVID crisis, which I think can be applied here, is that communication with your key stakeholders about your Brexit readiness is really important. It's echoing on a lot of what Ben said, but be confident and be bold and be out there. So if you know you have your house in order, say that. If you know that there's some areas that you have, a potential weakness on, but you have a plan B, say that. Communicate. Over the COVID crisis, what I saw in terms of dealing with vendors that we procure goods and services from is that the vendors that were calm, the ones who were confident, and the ones who communicated regularly, they really differentiated themselves from vendors who may have been just as organized in the back end, but when we didn't know it, we didn't have the confidence to rely on them. And that impacts decisions about where you're going to spend your money and who you're going to bank on going forward. Keep your message simple, keep it accurate, and keep it up to date. If things change, then update your message. Just because you send an alert out to clients now, or you have a phone call with somebody, the situation is very rapidly evolving. If it's different next week, pick up the phone and let them know. And then in terms of contracts, review your contractual commitments. Do you need to amend anything now? So if you have any penalties in your contracts for late delivery or late payment, either ones that you might have to pay out on or that you are relying on others to pay to you, have a look at them. Do they still work in the context of Brexit? With all that we know now, do they make sense? If you are the one who is committed to a contract that has a penalty for a late payment or a late delivery, can you amend it now? And if you can, have the conversation. It may be just about getting some flexibility or having an agreement with your partners that, you know, for the first 2 weeks of January, we all just need to wait and see how it works out. But you need to have that conversation up front, because we can't rely on force majeure provisions. So in the COVID environment, as I mentioned, there was a sense that we were all in it together. We were all, you know, trying to muddle through, and people could rely on force majeure provisions and agreements, at least at the start of the COVID crisis, to get a little bit of flexibility. In my view, it's not appropriate to rely on force majeure for Brexit, because we've known this is coming down the track. And so have the conversations, and if you need to change anything, now is the time to do it. So those are some practical tips that I hope might help. But keep it simple, keep it calm, and you know your business and you know the parties that you're interacting with. So at a minimum, if all that you do is just check in with people to say, we have it all under control and we think this will be fine, that can go a long way. And don't underestimate the value of a personal connection. So that was all I had for this morning. That's fantastic.
No, gur míl maid, tá héna garta níos far faoin brahamach leis a bheith géisteach leat. We're all calm and relaxed, and great guidance. And I think we're all very focused on the flow of our products and our services. But I think you've alluded to two key areas there we need to really zone in on, which is our people and our data. You know, and as you said, dust off the work that has been done on the GDPR side of it. Looking at all those key areas, and thank you for going through it in such detail. I suppose this is all going to cost a lot of money, and we're going to be dealing, you know, 50 countries you said you're dealing with. What advice would you give to people when they're starting out, before they kind of look at their contracts and make a contract maybe for a sale, and they might be looking at different currency? What should they consider maybe in time frames? Because from the time you do the contract to the time you might bring in another currency, there's a huge risk factors there. So maybe just a few pointers for people when they're going into third countries, dealing with different currencies, what they should look at.
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's really tricky because it depends on the negotiation power that you have. So if you're dealing with a big company and you want to get in, get your foot in the door, you're probably not going to have much leverage to say that you want to be paid in euro and you want to be paid in 15 days. But I think that if you assume that you don't have much leverage and you're going to have to take what's offered to you, then you can have conversations with banking institutions or other financial advisors about how you can hedge your currency risk. But those contracts themselves cost money. So some practical tips are to think about whether you need bank accounts in other currencies, because Irish banks do operate bank accounts in other currencies, so that you can receive the money in the other currency and maybe leave it there until the exchange rate is more appropriate, or you can take it out on your own terms. The other thing that I think is a good tip for businesses to realize is that if you're contracting, I'm just going to say in sterling today, and you know we're expecting that there's going to be volatility in sterling over at least the next number of months, then I think having an upfront conversation about with your vendor to say it may, or with your client to say it makes sense for me to do business with you if I'm getting this minimum amount. So here's my floor, and if sterling falls below whatever it happens to be, can we come back and have a reasonable conversation? I would be very receptive to that if clients or vendors came to me and asked me to consider that in a contract, because I think that's fair. That's not asking me to take on, as the purchaser or the procurer of the goods or services, all of the risk, but it is creating an environment where both parties are getting a fair cut of the deal. So I think that's an easy tip, and you can keep it very simple in how you address it in the contract. It's basically opening the door to come back. And another tip that I would say is, at a minimum, if you're agreeing pricing to be paid in another currency, which is not the currency that you operate in, you should have a regular review clause. You know, maybe if you can get 3 months, if you can get 6 months, that'll be really good. But at a minimum, once a year, because so many things change. And if your inputs are in one currency, but you're getting, you're getting paid in another currency, you're carrying all of the risk there. And particularly as a small business, that's a heavy load to carry. So just thinking about ways to reopen the door and have conversations just about the currency or the payment currency, not necessarily your base price.
That's great, Áine. Déach was a bheith cainte fan leit that tú an simúlach zíntaach Tionóladh trasna gur míl maid. So tá mu taci ag deir an chlár, tá mu ritsamachas arms báil an buchas ghlacha lena cainteoirí le ben míhalagus Áine sa bheith linneomh agus le machas cólaci Baba Cléan agus Sinead a bhí ag chuir an chlár seo le chéile agus ríbar fad a bhí len don srá san Iomlán agus go ranna cumarsáid thugcúna mórghain le seo a chuir ar láthair. So gur míle maigi as we're almost mata ein cheist tíocht agi leis a seo ágal is féidirlinn sunray na cainteoirí chomhlachtaí agus beidir an temple in the lobe. So thank you all for being with us, and thank you guys for